Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don. I'm a consultant in life sciences. I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. Before we hop into today's interview, I just wanted to mention real briefly, I still have my organizational maturity assessment live on my website for those of you who would be interested in going through an assessment to try and see how scalable your organization is. And so I would encourage you to visit the 5280lsc.com website, 5280 Life Sciences website, and go through the organizational maturity assessment. So with that, I wanted to bring in my guest, Chris Anderson. Chris is a seasoned pharmaceutical professional with more than 20 years of experience in multiple fields within the industry. And so with that, welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So would you just mind taking a moment to introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, I mentioned a little bit before, but really appreciate the service that you're doing for the life science community. It's really impressive to see just the wide array of people that have come on your podcast. So really appreciate it.
I really appreciate that as well. And since you mentioned it, I wanted to just take a quick moment as well. So on LinkedIn, I've put out on a daily basis, there's an announcement that's going out for anybody that's going to bio. There's another opportunity for people to be interviewed on the podcast. I'll be at bio and, thought that I would take the opportunity there as well. But today is all about you. And so, please share a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I am originally from Chicago, and grew up there. And while I was growing up, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life, probably like most people. I had visions of being a doctor someday and just crazy things. So, long story short is I ended up going to pharmacy school. So I'm a pharmacist by trade. I kind of joke around. I can count by fives really fast and tens, depending on the day. I can do it pretty quickly. So I worked in retail after graduating for a few months, and while I was in school. Um, Short story is that I had the ability to go out and do some internships at kind of a manufacturing kind of the industry. And so I was like, oh, wow, I could do something as a pharmacist out in the industry. Didn't even know that was possible. And so I worked in retail after graduating, but kind of had the knack to come back into industry. And so kind of made that jump and really have been in the industry ever since. So I've been now. I'm actually going on year 23 now. Yeah, year 23, and I've kind of jumped around, kind of various disciplines from quality to regulatory to tech services, kind of manufacturing, production, and kind of all things in between. And so I think if you would have asked me 20 years ago when I was a pharmacist, or 23 years ago when I was a pharmacist, that I would still be in the industry, I would have told you were crazy. So, yeah, it's been quite a journey to say the least.
Yeah. And so, what made you pursue even being a pharmacist? What sort of interested you in getting into this space in the first place?
Yeah, it's as crazy as it sounds. It was actually a suggestion from a college professor. I had originally planned to kind of go into biology, and she kind of pulled me aside when I was in kind of freshman courses, kind of undecided. She said, "Hey, Chris, you kind of have a little bit of a different personality. I think you really should look into go into pharmacy. You can help people. You can really get involved in science, and there's a need at the time. There was a really drastic need for pharmacists. It was kind of a we're short-handed out in the retail world." And so I kind of looked into it some more, kind of saw the coursework, and I thought, wow, this really aligns with kind of my initial thoughts, and decided, okay, I'll make the jump. And I did not regret it, kind of once I got into it for sure.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it's interesting to me always to sort of hear like the career transition, right? So you go from pharmacy to quality. You said that you had done a few different things in between.
Yeah.
To me, and this is just my perception of quality inside of, most pharmaceutical companies, it's extremely detailed. You have a lot that you have to sort of watch on the periphery that could get you in trouble. And so you just got to make sure that, sort of things are staying in line as well. So, what is the day in life like for you as the senior director of quality at Myosite?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So if you were to ask me previous to Myosite, it was kind of in more larger pharma, if I would say, and um, it's different than it's different from larger pharma to kind of small biotech kind of startup type thing. So for me, kind of in the kind of the biotech space, it's a little bit of everything. You're firefighting to some days. You know, if there's an issue that you have to kind of deal with kind of on a daily basis, there is, as the product and the life cycle starts to kind of push itself out, you're starting to now kind of plan. So you're doing some strategic planning and kind of looking out around the horizon of, you know, what resources do we need? What systems maybe do we need? Or what do we need to modify to kind of make sure that we're staying compliant with kind of, ongoing regulations. So it's a little bit of a hodgepodge of everything because we're such a small company. You have to kind of dive in. So sometimes, Don, I literally on my desk here. I'm writing documents. I'm typing documents, and on the other
Yeah.
cases, I'm putting together PowerPoint presentations or whatever the case may be. So it's really all things in between.
And I think that's just the life of most smaller companies, right? I mean, I've lived a bit of that life myself, and so I tell everybody, look from 1 minute you could be having to do janitorial services, and then the next minute you're doing an executive presentation. It just depends on sort of the size of the company and whatever the needs are at that point in time. But yeah,
Yeah, and it's weird too because, or not weird, but it's different too because to your point about quality, you do have to kind of have a wide scope. If it was just, hey, we could focus in on manufacturing, that would be great, but you kind of have to have knowledge about a little bit of everything. At least knowledge enough to understand, do you have risk there, or do you have a problem there, or are you pretty good? Are you best in class there? So yeah, it just kind of depends on what it is. I think long term though, it's kind of scaling up and kind of getting ready for that kind of, hopefully launching of a product and commercially what it looks like. So
yeah, so it's a good lead in. So who is Cook Myosite, and what are your products?
yeah, so we are kind of right now we're in a phase three, kind of, I don't want to say late stage, but we're in phase three clinical trials for what we call our AMDC product. So it's autologous muscle cell products. And basically, at its core, what we do and what our mission is we're trying to make regenerative medicine kind of a part of everyday medicine. And again, kind of going back, if you would have asked me in pharmacy school if that was a mission statement, I would have said you're crazy. It was like regenerative medicine. What's that? So when you kind of look at it, that's what our goal is. What we do is we actually take a biopsy from a patient in an outpatient clinical setting. We take that sample, bring it in house from their leg, basically. It's a biopsy. It's muscle cells that we're looking to get into. So we take that biopsy, a muscle cell biopsy. We bring it in house. We actually break the cells down to their myocytes. So if anybody ever wonders why myocyte, the individual muscle cell is myocyte. So we break it down to our individual muscle cells. We grow them, and then we kind of ship them back to the patient, and we inject them hopefully where we can regenerate and rebuild muscle cell where a patient has lost function. So it's really unique. It definitely was something that I was not super familiar with coming from large pharma, from typical cell therapy. But we are kind of researching right now three primary indications. One is our stress, we call it stress urinary incontinence. So, kind of a fun fact, or maybe not so fun fact, is that um, female patients around the world, probably around 60% or so, deal with some sort of urinary incontinence issue. And so when you really look at it, there's not a lot out there to kind of help treat them. And this is an area where you can actually use your muscle cells to regenerate and rebuild some function around
Wow.
their kind of their urinary function. So along the same lines, we're looking at fecal incontinence. So same idea,
Hmm.
just with fecal incontinence. And then we've recently started to research a little bit more in depth what we call tongue dysphagia. So cancer patients that maybe have had a loss of their tongue function or have parts of their tongue that have been cut out, and they've really struggled to kind of um, keep whatever function they have. It's a really debilitating uh, disease. It's something that again, if you look into it, it's really kind of sad. So this actually has the capability, or we're hoping it has the capability of regaining some of their ability to chew food, swallow food,
Wow.
all things in between.
That's amazing. Yeah, and for sure, I'm very familiar with the female incontinence as well as even the fecal incontinence as well. So yeah, I mean, very interesting uses for the drug. One of the other things I want to go back to though, in terms of your career, so you've held a lot of different roles, from training, it looked like, to quality. Um, what sort of interested you, more on the quality side, to pursue this as a profession?
Yeah, so when I first kind of came in, kind of green. I again, kind of being a retail pharmacist, I knew, okay, hey, there's these drugs, sometimes tablets, capsules, sometimes injections, kind of depending on what it was. So when I got into the industry, I like to use the term, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so as I kind of started on my career trajectory, I was like immersed in kind of, wow, there are so many things out there that I did not realize that went into actually making this. And so early on, I had made the decision, I'm going to try to learn as much about the industry and how this stuff actually gets to the market, whether it's a tablet or a capsule or whether it's, in this case, regenerative medicine. Um, I just said, I'm going to jump around. I'm going to learn stuff. So kind of fast forward, um, I kind of just migrated to the quality group because that function really gets their hands on almost everything. So if you kind of jump, if you kind of make that leap of logic, I come in, I want to learn a lot about medicine. Okay, great. How it's brought to the market, how we make it. Okay, now fast forward 20 years, I want to be in a position where I can kind of touch that same kind of breadth of knowledge. And so quality kind of gave me that opportunity, and that's really what kind of led me there. Other aspect is, there's a kind of a pharmacist link there too, so I got to see how those patients would how they would lives would potentially improve, whether it's an antibiotic, or something else. I kind of saw a patient improvement, and I said, okay, I want to make sure that what those patients are getting, they can really rely on, and that's another aspect of it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like to me, there are a lot of very tangible items on the quality side, that you can put your hands on. I've worked on, I mean, I essentially managed quality for General Electric for a number of years,
Yeah,
on the implementation side. And so, I said I ran U.S. quality, and one of the, quality leaders that I had as a mentor, thankfully, was just a great individual. It helped me through, essentially FDA audits and things like that, to try and
yeah,
make sure that we were always prepared, and we always knew exactly how to manage things. But I also knew very tangibly where the organization was. And then if I go to like the adult learning side, there's so many, it's a great, place to dedicate, your life to. And I love, sort of teaching as well. But
yep,
there are a lot of intangibles on the adult learning side, where you're essentially, you put out the material, and then you just don't know what people are going to, pick up and absorb either. So, I kind of look at the two as, being like tangible, intangible, kind of worlds that you were having to live in, and that was a reason for the question, because it's definitely a journey from one to the other, as I look at it.
yeah, and when you looked at part of being a pharmacist, obviously, if you just looked at it as a core, um, when you come in to maybe get a new medication or something like that, you get it. Part of our job is to train. Hey, take this once, twice a day, whatever it is. And then as we kind of progress, even teaching the patient a little bit more about what it actually does. I think that's even become even more relevant as we progressed in the industry. But yeah, so as I was kind of involved in training and learning and development, and how that correlates to the breadth of things that you touch within quality. I mean, listen, I learn every day, but being able to kind of take that and then teach around it, and try to make sure people know, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Um, it seems so simple, but in so many cases, I've encountered so many situations where it's like, wow, I didn't even know that. Like, this is why we're doing something this way. To make it more compliant, sure, but there's actually some teaching here of why it may even impact the patient while we're doing it. So yeah, there's so many linkages to training and quality, and kind of my background just kind of led to it.
Yeah, very good. So, in your professional career, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I think especially in my current position, it's the newness of regenerative medicine, and I think probably other folks that have been on your podcast have kind of said similar things. It's so new. It's such a different type of medication, a different product, a different way of doing things that it's a challenge to even kind of figure out how to navigate certain areas because there's not a lot of guidance. There's not many companies out there that are doing a lot of this. For some of the stuff that has gotten out there and got approved, okay, it's out there. But for us, it's kind of a brand new world. There's not a ton of companies that have got our type of product out to the marketplace. And so trying to figure out, something simple like, hey, how do we make sure that we ship this thing and make sure it gets right to the patient at the clinic? Just something similar, that making sure that it stays within certain temperature or certain things like that seems pretty simple, but it's not nearly as simple as what people would think it might be. So I think the biggest challenges that I have here has been just the newness of what we're doing. And then as we progress, hey, are we staying compliant? Are we doing our checks? Are we doing our proper things that we need to do to make sure the product is safe and effective for the patient? So I think that's one big thing. And really the evolving industry as a whole, I think, is an overall challenge. It's changed to where trying to explain what we do, and having the FDA understand it, or having other companies understand it, whatever the case may be. There's a learning curve even there. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that happens in our industry that I mean, I've said it in other episodes as well that I mean, the science is just absolutely blows me away oftentimes in terms
Yeah,
of some of the things that we do, and just watching. Essentially, people, scientists will stand up and say, "Well, we're going to do this," and they make it sound almost like, "Hey, this is natural for
yeah,
for
yeah,
things to happen." And yet that there's an audience that's out there. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm thankful for the podcast as well, that I know that there's an audience that's out there that needs to sort of understand things at a deeper level as well. And so thank you for explaining the challenge, because I agree with you. It's oftentimes a challenge that I think many face in our industry.
yeah. And if you spin the quality, kind of this quality aspect on it, there are times where it's challenging to kind of figure out, okay, hey, is what we're doing compliant? There's not. It sounds maybe so simple, like, oh yeah, it should be black and white, but it's such a new area that it challenges you on that end, even just kind of from that day to day. So yeah, it's definitely something that it's challenging, but it's also fun because you're learning as you go.
Absolutely. And what are some of the biggest opportunities that you see for the future?
So I think the biggest opportunities that I see, and maybe Don, if you don't mind, I'll give you two answers. But one is, I think there is a huge opportunity for companies that are kind of getting into cellular therapy and gene therapy to really partner with the government, partner with other businesses, partner with entities that are larger to really figure out where the needs are.
Mm,
There's so many unmet needs out there that the it's hard to imagine, but tablets and capsules, we didn't really have a whole heck of a lot to give you as a patient. Well, now we're getting into kind of regenerative medicine, personalized medicine, and so being able to work with different components of the life science groups and the government entities that are associated with it, I think is a really unique time to do it, because again, it is so new. I think from the quality perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges is to make sure that we're we're moving forward, but also making sure that we have we're making those checks and balances. We're making sure that they're there, because you can get into purely scientific mode, and it makes sense. Like, hey, I'm going to go from A to B. Makes sense to me, but is it compliant?
mm,
And that's a different conversation sometimes. So I think there's a really just a vast area where, and you're starting to see papers and different groups starting to kind of talk about it and build processes around it and offer those types of things out there. It's a really, really, really unique area where I think people can really get involved, especially in cell and gene therapy arena.
yeah. Yeah. I guess I would go back to a couple of things that you said, right? I mean, in terms of the unmet need, we definitely are in a very tough situation right now with the funding for a lot of companies. I mean, trying to make their way through. I mean, I know of, a couple of really breakthrough technologies that are coming that, frankly, the CEOs are just fighting to try and get initial funding, to be able to carry the research forward. And those challenges are only going to compound here in the short term as well. I mean, I don't see. There were people that were telling me, hey, look, June, July of this year, we're going to start to see a different wave. But that Silicon Valley Bank, sort of
Yeah,
challenge that we just went through, sort of froze everybody in place for a moment. So they're kind of hanging on to their cash as well.
yeah.
So yeah.
And you had mentioned challenges earlier. Yeah, if you look at the macro challenges kind of just from the industry, I mean, I know it sounds really crazy, but we're still even dealing with a little bit of kind of the COVID hangover, I'll call it, where we're, I know you probably know this. We struggle sometimes to find people,
Mm,
to help with it because yeah, I mean, there's just it's tough to even get certain individuals kind of involved with it. And so when you look at it from that perspective, even okay, resources can become an issue on top of money, and so yeah, there's a lot of those macro headwinds that I think can even add to your day to day challenges that you probably have.
right. And then in terms of partnering, the consortium episodes from last week, I felt like the two episodes from last week more or less tied together in terms of consortia. And, what's interesting to me is I feel like those are opportunities again to try and get the academic institutions to partner with industry as well. And, so, I feel like there are opportunities out there, but again, it's sort of, at what level, right? Because that would play through on the scientific level. But again, if you're in a quality function or in an operations function, you're probably not getting served at that same level either. And so there's opportunities again to partner even broader. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of those areas, like I said, it's so new. It's like I said, when you do kind of the old school, what you would think of as traditional industry, okay, yeah, there's stuff out there that's not a problem. But boy, there's a whole new wave of us that are out there that it's like, wow, what are you doing? Oh, what are you doing? And you almost organically find out. But yeah, it's definitely an area where it's unserved, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. So Chris, there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Yeah, I think for me, what inspires me, and I see it here at Myosite every day, is just the people and the just the ideas that people bring. It's really inspiring to come in and to even talk about certain things that we're doing here and at other places. It's just it kind of takes your breath away a little bit when you sit back and you actually really think about it. We kind of we lose the focus on it sometimes, but it's like, wow, if you would have told me that 20 years ago, I would have told you were crazy. We're curing cancers. We're fulfilling 60% of women that have stress urinary incontinence. I would have never in a million years thought that it was there, but some of the people and their ingenious ideas, their inventive ideas, it inspires me every day because the future is really bright.
Thank you for sharing that. What concerns you?
I think the biggest thing that concerns me is that the hurdles that we face to try to get some of these things to the patients, it because there's not maybe the best guidelines, or there's not a lot of kind of guide rails even to kind of push you along those processes, can kind of delay getting some of that stuff to the patient. And so you want to do it safely, you want to do it effectively, of course, from that perspective, that goes without question. But the speed at which you have to do that, are we able to get those unmet needs to where it matters, to
Mm,
where it matters to the patient. And I think that's the thing that concerns me the most.
yeah. And then what excites you?
No doubt, what excites me is the future. There's so many things out there that can really have an impactful um, part of their life. I mean, just from a medication perspective, but even if you think about things like AI and some of these other things that are kind of going into different areas, um, it's so exciting because it's so new, and there's so much. Like I said, there's so many unmet needs there that uh, the sky's the limit. And so when you look at it even from the quality lens, um, there's so much work to do, and so much just kind of things to kind of write down and mark down and figure out how we do this and how we navigate this and set up certain areas and guidelines and all this other kind of things that just maybe come naturally to people that have been in the industry for such a long period of time. But it's really exciting to be a part of at the ground level, and try to build those things up.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you, Chris Anderson, for being here and telling us about Cook Myosite and all the great things that you're doing. Thanks a lot for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Don. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.